So the BBC has found themselves in a very, very tricky situation. And in this video, we're going to go through the two major blunders that they've made recently that has put them in a lot of hot water and actually has led to people resigning at the BBC and also internal investigations to take place about how they operate as a news organisation. Now, the first major issue that we are going to talk about is this. BBC review finds serious flaws over Gaza documentary. Now, to get into these flaws, we need to understand fundamentally how the BBC operates, or at least how they're supposed to operate. The BBC, being owned and operated by the British government, is supposed to, we can laugh about this, but they're supposed to be completely impartial. There's supposed to be not any bias in any given news story, and to be honest, I think that whole premise is completely flawed anyway. People have biases. Everyone has biases. By human nature, we all do, but the BBC are supposed to have each of their news articles verified and independently checked by various different parties to make sure that they are above board with what they publish out there. They're supposed to just relay information as factually correctly as possible and allow people to come to their own conclusions. Well, recently the BBC made a documentary called How to Survive a War Zone, and this was a journey following what's currently happening in Gaza, and it was supposed to be, for all intents and purposes, a journalistic look about what's happening at the moment in that part of the world. However, the BBC didn't disclose a few things. But a very quick 15-second thank you to private internet access. If you're looking for a fantastic VPN, a VPN that doesn't keep any logs, a VPN that stops your ISP and the governments from prying on your online activities, and a VPN that keeps you safe and secure when you're using the internet in public, check out private internet access at the link down below, where you can get yourselves 4 months free and 86% off. Now let's get on with the video. Now, whether the documentary was factually correct or not is not really something that we can comment on. And one of the reasons that we can't comment on that is because of the bias in the way this documentary was shown. The documentary Gaza: How to Survive a War Zone was pulled from iPlayer last week after it emerged that its 13-year-old narrator was the son of a Hamas official. It says it has no plans to broadcast the programme again in its current form or return it to iPlayer. Hoyo Films, the production company that made the documentary for the BBC, said it felt it was important to hear from voices that haven't been represented on screen throughout the war with dignity and respect. The company added it was cooperating fully with the BBC to help understand where the mistakes have been made. Now, I fully understand the need for the stories to be shared of what's happening in various conflicts around the world. It's very important to help the rest of the world build a picture of what's happening on our planet. But I also think it's fair to assume that there should be a level of transparency about what the biases may be for the people that are being included in this documentary. When the BBC makes a documentary, it's often assumed that what we're seeing is, for the most part, what's actually happening. And that may be the case in this very instance. But when you start to maybe taint the source a little bit by not clarifying some of the bits of information, and also nowhere did they mention about who the source of the information was, it kind of actually muddies the water for everyone. I think personally it takes away from the actual victims of conflict when their story can be ruined by the fact that their bias or the bias of the story wasn't disclosed. Because any genuine concerns that were raised in that programme now get boiled down to maybe that's just bias, and some things that people might have taken as genuine concerns would have the same thing. Effectively, the documentary and spreading the word becomes absolutely pointless when the non-biased news organisation exercises severe levels of bias. The BBC removed the documentary after the concerns were raised that it centred on a boy called Abdullah, who is the son of Hamas's Deputy Minister of Agriculture. Hamas is prescribed as a terrorist organisation by the UK and others. It also launched a review into the film, and the BBC's board met earlier on Thursday to discuss it. In the statement, a BBC spokesperson has said both the production company and the BBC had made unacceptable flaws and that it takes full responsibility for these and the impact that it had on the corporation's reputation. It added the BBC had not been informed of the teenager's family connection in advance by the film's production company. The spokesperson says during the production process, the independent production company was asked in writing a number of times by the BBC about any potential connections he and his family might have with Hamas. Since transmission, they have acknowledged that they knew that the boy's father was a Deputy Agriculture Minister in the Hamas government, and they have also acknowledged that they never told the BBC this fact. So it's one thing for it to be a fact, and that's something that maybe the viewer should be aware of. I also think it's another concern that allegedly the production company potentially tried to hide that from the BBC. In this instance, I'm not sure whether the bias is due to the BBC or it's due to the production company that didn't clarify things to the BBC first. I guess the ongoing investigation will bring those results to light. In its statement, Hoyo added, "We feel this remains an important story to tell, and that our contributors, who have no say in the war, should have their voices heard." And this is something that I do agree with. Stories need to be told and voices need to be heard. But that should be all the more reason for transparency, in my opinion. Now this brings us on to the next big blunder that has recently emerged by the BBC. Recently it's come to light about another mistake that the BBC have made recently. Mistake or intentional, I'm not here to be the judge, jury and executioner, I'm just here to report on it. Now the BBC aired a documentary about Donald Trump through their Panorama series. Now when BBC does a Panorama section, it's essentially when they look at real world events and do kind of a small journalistic take on what's happening in that situation. They're kind of like mini documentaries to feast your eyes on to understand what's happening in the world. Well, during this documentary, they took a clip of something that Donald Trump said. And I will roll the clip for you now.
I'm gonna walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell.
Well, as it turns out, this isn't really what Donald Trump said. They took a clip of something he said, and then a clip of something else he said 54 minutes later during the speech, merged them together to make it look like a bit more of an incitement to violence sort of thing. And of course, this has led to Donald Trump doing what he does best and threatening to sue people. And to be honest, he's probably got a case here. Now, the BBC has responded to this in a number of different ways. They've gone from kind of admitting what they did to at the same time trying to caveat it by saying that it kind of comes down to, you know, journalistic flair so the viewers understand what Donald Trump was getting at. They're basically saying that the essence of these two clips spliced together form an accurate picture of Donald Trump, which whilst I believe that they have the right to have their own opinion on it, I don't think when it comes to journalistic integrity, they should really take what was said completely out of context with two little clips that were 54 minutes apart, splicing them together and making it look like he said something he didn't say. Now personally, I look at American politics in a very probably weird way to, I imagine, a lot of people. I kind of look at it like it's people in a zoo. It's absolutely mental. Like, American politics is a spectacle for television when you compare it to UK politics. And I have no affinity for political parties in the UK or American political parties. What I do know is that Donald Trump has a lot of things that he can legitimately be criticised for. Release the files. So the need to splice something he said and cut it out of context to make it look not favourable isn't really necessary. He said a lot of things that can be considered quite controversial that clip wasn't needed for.
I've said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her.
Now, of course, all of this has called into question the BBC's journalistic integrity, and it has led to resignations and full investigations taking place into these documentaries that are being made by the BBC, because clearly something has gone wrong here. Now, like I said at the start of the video, the BBC is supposed to be non-biased. I don't for 1 second personally believe that the BBC is not biased. Of course they are. Like, everyone has a bias, and each BBC journalist, whether they're left or right, will write things that politically are driven. I'm not sure why it's taken to this point for an investigation to take place about whether the BBC actually exercises their bias in their media and journalism. Of course they do. And to be honest, I think it's a problem that needs to be corrected and fixed. I am going to keep following how this all evolves over the coming days and weeks and months, because this is like a grey area with Article 19, but also at the same time it ties into freedom of speech, it ties into a lot of different areas of journalism and speech in the UK. And also, it's always fun to dunk on the BBC. Like, they come knocking at your door asking if you've got a TV license. Yeah, that's a real thing. To any people out there that aren't from the UK, Google what a TV license is. Everyone in the UK knows what it is, but to Americans, whenever I've tried to explain it, they are baffled by the concept. And to be honest, when they relay it back to you in the way that they hear it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty bad. That's pretty dystopian. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you check out private internet access at the link down below, and I shall see you all in the next video.